Stop scrolling right now. This story will stay with you long after the engine noise fades. And if you want more raw, unforgettable stories like this that hit the heart of America, smash that subscribe button and stay with me. Because what you're about to hear begins on a sun-scorched stretch of highway outside a small Midwestern town where chrome glinted like teeth and laughter rolled heavy as thunder. The kind of laughter that comes from men who believe the road belongs to them. The kind that echoed when she raised her hand and said, calmly but loud enough to cut through revving engines, "Step back!" And they laughed harder because she didn't look like someone who could stop anything at all. Not the bikers with their leather vests stitched with skulls and flags. Not the line of roaring Harleys hemming in the gas station like a steel corral. Not the men whose boots were thick and whose eyes were sharper than the knives clipped to their belts. And she stood there anyway, small compared to the machines, hair pulled tight, dust on her jeans, hands steady even as the smell of fuel and hot rubber pressed into her lungs. And when one of them leaned closer, breath sour with beer, and said something cruel about her being lost, about her needing a man to speak for her, she didn't flinch. She just repeated it. Quieter now? Step back. As if she were talking to a child about to touch a hot stove. And that's when the laughter twisted into something else because she added, "I'm here for my son." And in that instant, the air changed, though none of them understood why. Not yet. Because to them, she was just a woman in the wrong place at the wrong time, unaware that her son sat cuffed inside the diner across the lot, blood drying at his temple from a scuffle that had exploded minutes earlier when a biker's hand had shoved a waitress and her boy, barely 20, had stepped between them without thinking, because that's how she raised him, to step in, to stand up, even when fear says run. And now the bikers thought it was funny that a mother had come marching into their circle because they didn't see the history in her eyes, the nights she'd slept in her car while studying for a law degree she never finished, the years she worked county dispatch listening to screams through a headset until she learned how danger breathes before it strikes, the training she never put on a resume, the favors owed, the people she knew by first name and by scar. And as the men closed in, one of them nudging her shoulder with a laugh, she let her gaze slide past them to the road where dust curled in the distance, counting seconds, counting heartbeats, because she had not come unprepared. And when a siren wailed faintly far off, one biker spat and said it wasn't for them. This town never was. And she almost smiled, because towns remember, even when people forget. And she remembered this one better than most, remembered when her husband had died on that same highway years ago. After pulling a stranger from a wreck, remembered how the bikers back then had ridden on without stopping, how she had promised herself that the road would never take from her again without paying a price. And inside the diner, her son stared at the tabletop, wrists aching, replaying the moment he'd swung his fist, knowing it would cost him, not knowing how much, not knowing his mother was already there, already between him and the worst version of the world. And when the bikers laughed again, and one reached to touch her hair, she moved fast, faster than they expected, a sharp twist, a pressure point, a yelp of surprise as a grown man dropped to his knees, laughter choking into curses, and the circle broke just enough for her voice to carry. Not loud, not angry, just certain. I said step back. And they did, stunned not by pain, but by recognition, because men like that recognize authority when it doesn't ask. And now the sirens were closer, not one, but many, and the men's bravado wavered as a black SUV rolled in behind the patrol cars. Government plates catching the sun, and someone muttered a question, because this was more attention than a bar fight ever deserved, and the diner door swung open as officers moved in, professional, controlled, and a tall man in a plain suit stepped out of the SUV, scanning the scene until his eyes landed on her, and the world seemed to tilt, because the bikers saw his face drain of color as he said her name, not loud, but with the weight of respect and something like regret. And suddenly the laughter was gone, replaced by the hum of engines idling like nervous animals, and the man in the suit walked to her, nodded once, and turned to the bikers to introduce himself, not by title at first, but by history, by the cases he'd put away, the lines he'd drawn, the wars he'd ended quietly, and only then did he add who he was now, a federal prosecutor overseeing organized crime in 3 states, and the words landed heavy because patches and skulls mean less when federal time enters the conversation. And he gestured toward the diner where her son was being uncuffed, where a paramedic pressed gauze M.O.
And the prosecutor said calmly that witnesses had come forward, that cameras had angles, that hands had been placed where they shouldn't have been, and that choices were about to matter a great deal. And the bikers shifted, some angry, some calculating, because this wasn't the ending they'd imagined when the woman first said step back, and she watched them with a mother's focus, not on revenge, but on safety, on making sure no one else would get hurt today. And as the officers separated people and statements were taken, one biker, older than the rest, approached her with a stiffness that spoke of long miles and old injuries, and he said he'd lost a son once too. Said he didn't know why things went bad so fast, and she looked at him, really looked, and said that sometimes men confuse loud with strong, and he nodded as if he'd been waiting to hear that for years. And later, when the engines finally rolled away and the dust settled, she sat with her son on the diner steps, his head bandaged, his hands shaking, now that the adrenaline was gone, and he apologized for the trouble, for not calling her sooner, and she laughed softly, the sound of relief, and told him he did exactly what she taught him, but next time to let her handle the step back, and the prosecutor joined them, offering water, thanking her for showing up, for reminding everyone that lines still exist. And she told him she hadn't come to make a point. She'd come because that's what mothers do. And he said that was exactly the point. And as the sun dipped and the neon flickered on, the town exhaled, another story added to its bones. And somewhere on the highway, the bikers rode quieter, carrying a lesson heavier than their gear. That power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives on foot, says step back, and means it. And if you stayed with this story to the end, don't let it end here. Subscribe now for more stories of quiet strength, sudden justice, and the moments that remind us who we are when it matters most.